Fear of difference. It's the fifth of 14 characteristics of Ur-Fascism, as laid out by Umberto Eco, who was a sociologist and politician who actually grew up under Mussolini's fascist rule. And he wrote this article in 1995. The reason I find it so fascinating is because even though he wrote it 30 years ago, all of the tenets of fascism that he lays out we're seeing played out in real time. So let's take a look. This fifth one starts with, besides, disagreement is a sign of diversity. Back in the fourth one, it talks about disagreement being treason. So for your fascist, if you disagree with them, you are treasonous. Besides, disagreement is a sign of diversity. Your fascism grows up and seeks for consensus by exploiting and exacerbating the natural fear of difference. The first appeal of the fascist or prematurely fascist movement is an appeal against the intruders. Thus, your fascism is racist by definition. And I want to read this abstract. It's just a really quick summary of a chapter from this piece entitled Prejudice, Discrimination, and the Fear of Difference. If you want to look at this in more detail, it's at the Springer Nature link, or Springer Nature. Anyway, you can find that. Here it is up here. And the abstract goes as such. Prejudice is an antipathy toward another person, so just a deep, deep hatred, based upon pre existing belief or opinion, resulting in some form of social categorization or membership of a particular group. It relies upon a stereotypical characterization or generalization of others, which is not grounded in evidence or experience. In this sense, prejudicial views are not based upon rational judgments and are inherently unjust. In some cases, the views held about the members of another group are so exaggerated and misconceived that they become almost laughable. They're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats. However, it is easy to dismiss them as the product of ignorant and closed minds, as they can often be part of a social system which creates a hierarchical order, justifying discrimination in order to preserve the position of the superior group. Now, I want to start with an executive order that was written by Trump's team in September, or it was signed on September 22nd of 2020. And the reason I say it was written by Trump's team, because back in 2020, that was in his first term, that was just prior to the election. And this is actually written in the language that you would expect an executive order to be written in. So I don't think that it was written by Trump, but it really was written by his team. Anyway, I'm going to start with the reason why it justifies. This is his justification for writing an executive order entitled Executive Order on Combating Race and Sex Stereotyping. It starts this way. From the battlefield of Gettysburg to the bus boycott in Montgomery and the Selma to Montgomery marches, heroic Americans have valiantly risked their lives to ensure that their children would grow up in a nation living out its creeds, expressed in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. It was this belief in the inherent equality of every individual that inspired the founding generation to risk their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to establish a new nation, unique among the countries of the world. President Abraham Lincoln understood that this belief is the electric cord that links the hearts and patriotic and liberty-loving people, no matter their race or country of origin. It is the belief that inspired the heroic Black soldiers of the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment to defend that same Union at great cost in the Civil War. And it is what inspired Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to dream that his children would one day not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Thanks to the courage and sacrifice of our forebears, America has made significant progress toward realization of our national creed, particularly in the 57 years since Dr. King shared his dream with the country. I think that's not accurate. We have made progress. This much progress when this much is necessary. Anyway, Today, however, many people are pushing a different vision of America that is grounded in hierarchies based on collective social and political identities rather than in the inherent and equal dignity of every person as an individual. This ideology is rooted in the pernicious and false belief that America is an irredeemably racist and sexist country. I don't know that it's pernicious or false. I hope that it's not irredeemably racist and sexist, but we are absolutely still a racist and sexist country. That some people, simply on account of their race or sex, are oppressors. And that racial and sexual identities are more important than our common status as human beings and Americans. Now, see, that's easy to say if white male is the standard for human beings and that everybody else is based off of being white or male. Like, if you're only just talking about human beings, we're talking about white male human beings. Everybody else has to be identified as Black people or as women or as gay people. This destructive ideology is grounded in misrepresentations of our country's history and its role in the world. Although presented as new and revolutionary, they resurrected the discredited notions of the 19th century's apologists for slavery, who, like President Lincoln's rival Stephen A. Douglas, maintained that our government was made on the white basis by white men for the benefit of white men. It so fucking was. Our founding documents rejected these radicalized, racialized views of America, which were soundly defeated on the bloodstained battlefields of the Civil War. Yet now they are now being repackaged and sold as cutting-edge insights. They're designed to divide us and to prevent us from uniting as one people in pursuit of one common destiny for our great country. We're not repackaging or considering these as cutting-edge insights. We are saying that we never fucking made progress. I don't think anyone's claiming that this is new. It is something that we have been battling for hundreds of years in this country. Unfortunately, this malign ideology is now migrating from the fringes of American society and threatens to infect core institutions of our country. Instructors and materials teaching that men and members of certain races, as well as our most venerable institutions, are inherently sexist and racist, are appearing in workplace diversity trainings across the country, even in components of the federal government and among federal contractors. For example, the Department of the Treasury recently held a seminar that promoted arguments that virtually all white people, regardless of how woke they are, contribute to racism, and that instructed small group leaders to encourage employees to avoid narratives that Americans should be more colorblind or let people's skills and personalities be what differentiates them. If you want to learn a little bit more about the racism of people, even who think that they are woke, read the book Caste. It'll shake you to your core. Training materials from Argonne National Laboratories, a federal entity, stated that racism is interwoven into every fabric of America and described statements like colorblindness and the meritocracy as action of bias. It is completely biased, and racism is interwoven. This country was built upon the backs of enslaved people. It is interwoven into everything that this country started as. And and you can't heal as a nation if you can't begin to recognize and weed out those systemic problems. Anyway, materials from Sandia National Laboratories, also a federal entity, for non-minority males. Non-minority males, so white men, stated that an emphasis on rationality over emotionality was a characteristic of white males and asked those present to acknowledge their privilege to each other. A Smithsonian Institution museum graphic recently claimed that concepts like objective, rational, linear thinking, hard work being the key to success, the nuclear family, and belief in a single God are not values that unite Americans of all races, but are instead aspects and assumptions of whiteness. The museum also stated that facing your whiteness is hard and can result in feelings of guilt, sadness, confusion, defensiveness, or fear. No shit! If we are not facing our whiteness, we are not experiencing these feelings of guilt and sadness and confusion, defensiveness, or fear. That's the whole point. We have to feel some sort of way in order for us to want to change it. All of this is contrary to the fundamental premises underpinning our republic, that all individuals are created equal and should be allowed an equal opportunity under the law to pursue happiness and prosper based on individual merit. And if that were possible, if we actually could only offer advantages based on individual merit, that would be fantastic, because everybody could just work really hard and get ahead. And that is simply not how we function in this country. Executive departments and agencies, our uniformed services, federal contractors, and federal grant recipients should, of course, continue to foster environments devoid of hostility grounded in race, sex, and other federally protected characteristics. Training employees to create an inclusive workplace is appropriate and beneficial. The federal government is and must always be committed to the fair and equal treatment of all individuals before the law. I couldn't agree more. But there's the but. There's the but. But training like that discussed above perpetuates racial stereotypes and division and can use subtle coercive pressure to ensure conformity of viewpoint, which is stupid. Actually, it's because it's the diversity of viewpoint that is so beautiful about the diversity of people. Such ideas may be fashionable in the academy, like the smart people are thinking this, but the regular folks, but they have no place in programs and activities supported by federal taxpayer dollars. Research also suggests that blame-focused diversity training reinforces biases and decreases opportunities for minorities. I would love to see that research. Our federal civil service system is based on merit principles. These principles, codified at 5 U.S.C. 2301, call for all employees to receive fair and equitable treatment in all aspects of personnel management without regard to race or sex, and with proper regard for their constitutional rights. Instructing federal employees that treating individuals on the basis of individual merit is racist or sexist directly undermines our merit system principles and impairs the efficiency of the federal service. Similarly, our uniformed services should not teach our heroic men and women in uniform the lie that the country for which they are willing to die is fundamentally racist. But it is. It's not a lie. Such teachings could directly threaten the cohesion and effectiveness of our uniformed services. Now, I actually have heard some uniformed services members speaking and talking about how they could give a shit less about another person's gender or race when they are in basic training and they are all being put through the shit. They form a team that is so tightly bonded that all of the rest of the stuff really just falls away. It isn't until the bureaucracy starts to kind of interfere with all of that, like this is trying to do, that it becomes an issue. But regular service people, for the most part, from what I am hearing, and it's anecdotal, I will admit, but they could give a shit less. Such activities also promote division and inefficiency when carried out by federal contractors. The federal government has long prohibited federal contractors from engaging in race or sex discrimination and required contractors to take affirmative action to ensure that such discrimination does not occur. The participation of contractors' employees in training that promotes race or sex stereotyping or scapegoating similarly undermines efficiency in federal contracting. Such requirements promoting divisiveness in the workplace and distract from the pursuit of excellence and collaborative achievements in public administration. Therefore, it shall be the policy of the United States not to promote race or sex stereotyping or scapegoating in the federal workforce, or in the uniformed services, and not to allow grant funds to be used for these purposes. In addition, federal contractors will not be permitted to inculcate such views in their employees. Now, I want to take a look at some of the definitions. And the first definition that he wants to lay out is about divisive concepts. Divisive concepts means the concepts that one race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex, which is exactly what white supremacy is. It's not divisive to call it out. It's divisive to be it. 2, the United States is fundamentally racist or sexist. 3, an individual, by virtue of his or her race or sex, is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. I didn't know. That's how you would take it. I'm sorry you took it that way. No, be sorry you said it. 4, an individual should be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment solely or partly because of his or her race or sex. So basically, they shouldn't discriminate against me because I'm a white male. 5, members of one race or sex cannot and should not attempt to treat others without respect to race or sex. 6, an individual's moral character is necessarily determined by his or her race or sex. 7, an individual, by virtue of his or her race or sex, bears responsibility for actions committed in the past by other members of the same race or sex. And what this is talking about here is it's generational trauma. And we know that when a trauma occurs to an entire population of people for decades or centuries, that trauma trickles down. It becomes part of the DNA of the people that come behind. And what this is trying to say is that you can't blame me for shit my ancestor did. That got nothing to do with me, but it does. That is exactly what generational trauma is. 8, any individual should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any form of psychological distress on account of his or her race or sex. Are you fucking kidding me? What they're saying here is that if I feel psychological distress because of the guilt that you place upon me for being an oppressive white male or oppressive white woman, shouldn't cause me psychological distress. What about the psychological distress caused to an entire group of people for hundreds of years? Or 9, meritocracy or traits such as hard work ethic are racist or sexist, or were created by a particular race to oppress another race. No one is saying that a hard work ethic is racist or sexist. What we're saying is that we are not hiring, firing, and moving people forward based on hard work ethic. The term divisive concept also includes any other form of race or sex stereotyping or any form of race or sex scapegoating. So race or sex stereotyping means ascribing character traits, values, moral and ethical codes, privileges, status, or beliefs to a race or sex or to an individual because of his or her race or sex. It is the reality that people who are men and people who are white, including white women and including black men, have privileges that other people do not have. Race or sex scapegoating means assigning fault, blame, or bias to a race or sex, or to members of a race or sex because of their race or sex. It similarly encompasses any claim that consciously or unconsciously, I didn't know, and by virtue of his or her race or sex, members of any race are inherently racist or are inherently inclined to oppress others, or that members of a sex are inherently sexist or inclined to oppress others. So there was a study done, and maybe I'll try to see if I can find some more information about this. And I think it was done back in like the 70s or 80s, and it was ethically questionable. But there was a teacher who took a bunch of kids, and I think they might have been as low as like kindergarten or first grade or something really pretty young, and told the kids that people who had one color of eye were superior to everybody who did not have that color of eye. And that what that meant was that they got first choice of all of the playground equipment, that they got to have the best supplies in the classroom, that they would get to stand in line first to go to lunch, and so on and so forth. And these children fell comfortably into their superiority very, very quickly and disconcertingly so. And this group of kids that had been told that they were superior were actively discriminating against the kids that had been told that they were inferior. Now, the next day, the teacher reversed the roles and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. What I meant to say was that the kids of the color with the color eye that were superior yesterday, they're not the superior ones. They are inferior. And all of the other kids who have a different eye color are, in fact, superior and are given afforded the same privileges that the kids with the first eye color had yesterday." Now, we would think that because the kids had been oppressed yesterday, that by being given the superior privileges today, that they would have some compassion and empathy for the kids that had been oppressed. But what they in fact found was that not only did they also fall very quickly and comfortably into their role as superior kids, but they actually oppressed the kids that had been superior yesterday more than they had been oppressed the day before. So to say that people who are members of any race are inherently racist or inherently inclined to oppress others is simply bullshit. We know that human beings, based upon whatever kinds of categorizations we tend to put on at the time, whether it be gender or race, or right now the hot button is gender ideology, whatever it is that we use to kind of separate ourselves, we will use to oppress others if we are put in a position of power. That's just how that goes. So on January 20th of 2021, on Inauguration Day, President Biden signed an executive order titled this: Executive Order on Advancing Racial Equity and Support for Underserved Communities Through the Federal Government. And what he basically was doing was trying to undo all of the damage that President Trump's executive order sought to inflict upon people. So the very first thing that they did was well, you know what? No, what I want to do here is I want to take a look at the definitions. So, the definitions that had to be laid out in President Biden's executive order were very different from the definitions that we just read. And they go like this: For purposes of this order, A, the term equity means the consistent and systematic, fair, just, and impartial treatment of all individuals, including individuals who belong to underserved communities that have been denied such treatment, such as Black, Latino, and Indigenous and Native American persons, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, and other persons of color, members of religious minorities, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer, LGBTQ plus persons, persons with disabilities, persons who live in rural areas, and persons otherwise adversely affected by persistent poverty or inequality. And then B, the term underserved communities refers to populations sharing a particular characteristic, as well as geographic communities that have been systematically denied a full opportunity to participate in aspects of economic, social, and civic life, as exemplified by the list in the preceding definition of equity. Now, Biden signed this into law in January of 2021. 6 months later, in June of 2021, he realized that this executive order was not specific enough, that there was actually more to be said. So he entered a new executive order. And when I went to whitehouse.gov to find this executive order that he wrote into law on January or in June of 2021, I found this: page not found. Because, of course, we are rewriting history. So it's not enough just to leave it alone and be like, okay, we did this, we did this, we did this. No, we did that. This ain't done. This we didn't do. This doesn't exist. And you can see in the search bar that this is a website specifically for presidential actions. June 25th of 2021, Executive Order on Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility in the Federal Workforce. Fortunately, the Federal Register, which is a daily journal of the United States government, does have the archived executive order. and it was entitled Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility in the Federal Workforce. So it's DEIA. Now, he started off by basically just laying out that there was more to be said. So, on my first day in office, I signed Executive Order 13985, Advancing Racial Equity and Support for Underserved Communities through the Federal Government, which established that affirmatively advancing equity, civil rights, racial justice, and equal opportunity is the responsibility of the whole of our government. To further advance equity within the federal government, this order establishes that it is the policy of my administration to cultivate a workforce that draws from the full diversity of the nation. He then goes on, and I'm not going to read this entire paragraph, but you can look it up if you want to. And he lists out all of the different executive orders and presidential memorandum that have been put into place since it looks like August 18th of 2011 that are intended to move us forward. All of these executive orders and presidential memorandums that President Trump was trying to just abolish, all of it. And President Biden's like, yep, that ain't happening on my watch. So this is super interesting. Let us take a look at President Biden's new and expanded definitions. The term underserved communities refers to populations sharing a particular characteristic as well as geographic communities who have been systematically denied a full opportunity to participate in aspects of economic, social, and civic life. In the context of the federal workforce, this term includes individuals who belong to communities of color, such as Black and African American, Hispanic and Latino, Native American, Alaska Native and Indigenous, Asian American, Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander, Middle Eastern, and Northern African persons. It also includes individuals who belong to communities that face discrimination based on sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity, including lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, gender nonconforming, and non-binary, LGBTQ+ persons. Persons who face discrimination based on pregnancy or pregnancy-related conditions, parents, and caregivers. It also includes individuals who belong to communities that face discrimination based on their religion or disability, first-generation professionals or first-generation college students, individuals with limited English proficiency, immigrants, individuals who belong to communities that may face employment barriers based on older age or former incarceration, persons who live in rural areas, veterans and military spouses, and persons otherwise adversely affected by persistent poverty, discrimination, or inequality. Individuals may belong to more than one underserved community and face intersecting barriers. The term diversity means the practice of including the many communities, identities, races, ethnicities, backgrounds, abilities, cultures, and beliefs of the American people, including underserved communities. The term equity means the consistent and systematic, fair, just, and impartial treatment of all individuals, including individuals who belong to underserved communities that have been denied such treatment. That have been denied such treatment. The term inclusion means the recognition, appreciation, and use of the talents and skills of employees of all backgrounds. The term accessibility means the design, construction, development, and maintenance of facilities, information, and communication technology, programs, and services so that all people, including people with disabilities, can fully and independently use them. Accessibility includes the provision of accommodations and modifications to ensure equal access to employment and participation in activities for people with disabilities, the reduction or elimination of physical and attitudinal barriers to equitable opportunities, a commitment to ensuring that people with disabilities can independently access every outward-facing and internal activity or electronic space, and the pursuit of best practices such as universal design. Tell me why we don't like diversity. Tell me why we don't like equity. Tell me why we don't like inclusion. Tell me why we don't want accessibility for all people. I think one of the misconceptions is that DEI is an unfair hiring practice, and that's all that the people who are opposed to DEI think that it is. They think that it is giving preferential treatment to Black people and women. And that is not at all what it is. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility simply means offering all opportunities to all people. People still have to be hired on the basis of their qualifications and their merit. DEIA simply is offering opportunities to people who, generally speaking, don't get those opportunities because those opportunities have historically and still currently been offered to white men. And now we are back under the authoritarian and totalitarian fascist regime of President Biden. And so his inauguration day executive order on this topic was titled Ending Radical and Wasteful Government DEI Programs and Preferencing. And yes, we are going to go through this whole entire thing. It's actually pretty short. And when I said earlier that the first executive order that I read out was probably written by a whole team of people who really know what they were doing in government, and this one it is just like vomiting of all kinds of mis and disinformation. Let's read. By authority vested in me, blah blah blah. Section 1, purpose and policy. The Biden administration, because let's blame everything on Biden all of the fucking time, right? Forced illegal and immoral discrimination programs, which actually were not only moral and equitable, but they were the law, so they were not illegal. Going by the name of diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, into virtually all aspects of the federal government in areas ranging from airline safety to the military. This was a concerted effort stemming from President Biden's first day in office when he issued Executive Order 138985, advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities through the federal government. Pursuant to Executive Order 13985 and follow-on orders, nearly every federal agency and entity submitted equity action plans to detail the ways that they have furthered DEI's infiltration of the federal government. The public release of these plans demonstrated immense public waste and shameful discrimination. When they say public waste, they don't mean public waste. It is a buzzword that they use to mean we just don't like it. But if we can call it public waste, I mean, everybody wants to get rid of public waste. And shameful discrimination, which is actually, it is anti-discrimination. That ends today. Americans deserve a government committed to serving every person with equal dignity and respect, if only that were possible, and to expending precious taxpayer resources only in making America great. Let's be clear, when we talk about making America great again, what they mean is let's make America white men again. They want to go back to the 1950s where women didn't work because they were raising babies. They were working for free in the household, raising the community of the future. And Black, brown, indigenous people, they were not given the same opportunities. In fact, you know what? Let's not just give them no opportunities. Let's kick them the fuck out of the country. That's what making America great again means. It means making America white male again. Section 2, implementation. The Director of the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, assisted by the Attorney General and the Director of the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, shall coordinate the termination of all discriminatory programs, including illegal DEI and diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, DEIA, mandates, policies, programs, preferences, and activities in the federal government under whatever name they appear. To carry out this directive, the Director of OPM, with the assistance of the Attorney General as requested, shall review and revise as appropriate all existing federal employment practices, union contracts, and training policies or programs to comply with this order. Federal employment practices, including federal employee performance reviews, shall reward individual initiative, skills, performance, and hard work, and shall not under any circumstances consider DEI or DEIA factors, goals, policies, mandates, or requirements. B. Each agency, department, or commission head, in consultation with the Attorney General, the Director of OMB, and the Director of OPM, as appropriate, shall take the following actions within 60 days of this order. 1. Terminate to the maximum extent allowed by law all DEI, DEIA, and environmental justice offices and positions, including but not limited to Chief Diversity Officer positions, all equity action plans, equity actions, initiatives, or programs, equity-related grants or contracts, and all DEI or DEIA performance requirements for employees, contractors, or grantees. So basically, we are getting rid of everything that protects anybody who is not white men. 2, provide the director of the OMB with a hit list of all A. Agency or department DEI, DEIA, or environmental justice positions, committees, programs, services, activities, budgets, and expenditures in existence on November 4th, 2024, and an assessment of whether these positions, committees, programs, services, activities, budgets, and expenditures have been misleadingly relabeled in an attempt to preserve their pre-November 4th, 2024 function. So anything that might have been like renamed, because President Biden put a lot of things into place in his last few weeks of his term. And what this is seeking to do is to make sure that they weed out anything that might have been renamed or relabeled to protect it. They're going to get rid of those too. B, federal contractors who have provided DEI training or DEI training materials to agency or department employees, because if they do that, their contracts will be ripped up. And C, federal grantees who receive federal funding to provide or advance DEI, DEIA, or environmental justice programs, services, or activities since January 20th of 2021. So anybody who was given the opportunity to put these practices into place, if they were given federal funding under the Biden administration, they gone. They gone. 3, direct the deputy agency or department head to assess the operational impact, for example, the number of new DEI hires and cost of the prior administration's DEI, DEIA, and environmental justice programs and policies. So they want to find out how much did this cost? And whether they come up with the actual cost or not, they want to be able to prove that DEI costs the government money, therefore is considered federal, like wasteful spending. So that's why we're getting rid of it, because it costs people money. B, recommend actions such as congressional notifications under 28 U.S.C. 530D, and I have pulled that up here. Basically, it's just a report on the enforcement of laws, if you want to look that up in more detail. To align agency or department programs, activities, policies, regulations, guidance, employment practices, enforcement activities, contracts, including set-asides, which are contracts that were set aside for small businesses, grants, consent orders, and litigating positions with the policy of equal dignity and respect identified in Section 1 of this order. The agency or department head of the director of OMB shall jointly ensure that the deputy agency or department head has the authority and resources needed to carry out this directive. So basically, they want recommendations on what can we get rid of. Just tell me if it's got anything to do with DEI, it's gone. C, to inform and advise the president so that he, God, I need This is my shark puke bag today. The very fact that a presidential order uses he as the pronoun rather than he or she, because I'm assuming that this executive order is intended for long-term use, right? But the very fact, okay, anyway, that's a whole nother video. To inform and advise the president so that he may formulate appropriate and effective civil rights policies for the executive branch, the Assistant to the President for Domestic Policy shall convene a monthly meeting attended by the Director of OMB, the Director of OPM, and each deputy agency or department head too. So they have to have monthly meetings now to make sure that they're rooting all of this out. Yeah, that's not wasteful spending at all. To 1, hear reports on the prevalence and the economic and social costs of DEI, DEIA, and environmental justice in agency or department programs, activities, policies, regulations, guidance, employment practices, enforcement activities, contracts, including set-asides, grants, consent orders, and litigating positions. So want to hear the reports. They want to discuss any barriers to measures to comply with this order, and monitor and track agency and department progress and identify potential areas for additional presidential or legislative action to advance the policy of equal dignity and respect. So basically, they want to have monthly meetings to make sure that they are spending money and time and resources to get rid of equal opportunities for people. Section 3, severability. And this is the rest of this I'll read real quick. It's just basically says that if there's anything that's contradictory to this, this one overrules it. So severability, if any provision of this order or the application of any provision to any person or circumstance is held to be invalid, the remainder of this order and the application of its provisions to any other persons or circumstances shall not be affected. So if they find out that one part of this is not cool, the whole rest of it can still stand. Section 4, general provisions. Nothing in this order shall be construed to impair or otherwise affect the authority granted by law to an executive department or agency or the head thereof, or the functions of the director of the Office of Management and Budget relating to budgetary, administrative, or legislative proposals. This order shall be implemented consistent with applicable law and subject to the availability of appropriations. This order is not intended to and does not create any right or benefit, substantive or procedural, enforceable at law or in equity by any party against the United States, its departments, agencies, or entities, its officers, employees, or agents, or any other person. The White House, January 20, 2025. So there it is in one very short page, the complete and utter dismantling and destruction of everything that has been put into place thus far to ensure that anybody other than white men have some opportunity. Now, they will argue that everybody wants this. They were mandated. A mandate means overwhelming support for something. Like 29%, I think, of the registered electorate voted for him. But let's take a look. Let's actually look. And we are looking at Pew Research Center, which is a widely recognized accurate source. And they took a look in 2023, so not that long ago, y'all, not even 2 years ago. Diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. They did a study of this, and let's look at what they found. Let's just blow that up. Let's blow that up so we can take a look. Views of DEI in the workplace vary among demographic and partisan lines. Among all workers, only 16% thought that DEI initiatives in the workplace were a bad thing. 28% like, nah, I don't care. And 56% of all workers thought that this was a good thing. Men, 23% of men thought that was a bad thing. 27%, 50% of all men thought that DEI was a good thing. More than twice of men who didn't think it was a good thing. Among women, 9% thought DEI was a bad thing. 61% believing that it was a good thing. Only 30% like, meh. All right. Among white, black, Hispanic, and Asian, 21% of white people, because duh, of course the white people are going to have the most objection, just like the men have the most objection, right? The people in power are the people who have the most objection to offering equal opportunities to people who do not have the power. Even so, only 21% of white people said that DEI was a bad thing in the workplace. 31%, 47%, nearly half of white Americans thought that DEI was a good idea. Among black people, 1% said it's not a good thing. 78% thought it was a good thing. You know what this tells me is that black people understand that being offered opportunity has been necessary for them to even have the chance of getting ahead in this country. Among Hispanic people, 9% thought it was a bad thing. 65% think DEI in the workplace is a good thing. Among Asian Americans, 10% thought that DEI in the workplace was a bad thing. 72% thought that DEI is a good thing. Now let's take a look at the ages. 8%, so of what I guess this would be Gen Zs, 8% thought DEI in the workplace is not a good thing. And my guess would be a lot of that 8% are people who are still like just barely coming out from underneath their parents, who say that DEI is terrible. Anyway, 68% of Gen Zs think that the DEI in the workplace is a good idea. Among millennials, 30 to 49, 16% think it's bad, 56% think it's good. Among Gen Xers, shame on you! Shame on you. I am a Gen Xer, and I am disgusted that we have the largest percentage of people in my generation that think that DEI programs in the workplace are not a good thing. And I don't know, maybe it's because Gen Xers are just like, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. That's what we all had to do. We raised ourselves. Well, bullshit. Bullshit. But thankfully, almost half, 46% of Generation X believes that DEI in the workplace is a good thing. And then, this is so cool, but boomers are like, y'all, we've seen a thing or two, and just trust us when we tell you DEI is a good thing. Because they saw it. They saw it even further back than the rest of us saw it, what it was like to live in a world where DEI was not a thing. And they're like, yeah, no, fuck that. More than half, 52%. Believed that DEI was a good thing in the boomer generation. Now, this is also really interesting. I mean, this is not surprising. I'm going to skip down here for a second. That 4% of Democrats are like, no, DEI is not a good thing. And 78% of the Democrats are like, yes, DEI. We like inclusion, equity, diversity, accessibility. But look at this. Aside from the 39% that are like, Republicans are split 30 to 30. 30% believing that DEI is not a good thing, but 30% believing DEI is a good thing. Only 1/3 of Republicans or right-leaning Republicans think that DEI is a bad thing. So you cannot claim that getting rid of DEI is a mandate from the people. The Pew Research people beg to differ. I'm snarky positivity, which means that we always end on a positive note. And I'm not going to lie, I'm having a little bit of trouble finding the positive note in this. I think the positive note is the one that we just ended on, which is that despite what the government decides to do, the people are in favor of lifting up people that have traditionally not had the same opportunities. So despite what the government is doing, the people, all of the people have a heart to lift up people who don't have those same opportunities. And that is really good news. So that's a positive note for today. And I do believe that the people, which is almost all of the people are going to prevail. That's positive note number 2 I was going to say, is they can stop formal DEI programs, but they cannot stop people from lifting up other people. They cannot stop us from having a heart to give other people opportunities that we are given without a second thought. Again, I'm Snarky Positivity. If you like this content, please subscribe to my channel. I'm trying to build up my YouTube channel and hopefully get to go live here sometime in the near future. Okay, bye.